Dune Awakening has come out with their biggest patch to date, and we're going to break this entire thing down right now. This patch just came back online, but I am a little bit delayed with the information here. We've been out of town for a couple days, unfortunately. So just as a brief recap, if you don't know, Dune Awakening is now going to be coming out with public test servers. Currently, they are testing out patch 1.1.1. However, today we got the patch 1.1.0.17 that is in itself still jam-packed with a bunch of changes that are incredibly important to take note of. Let's go ahead and jump right on into this thing. Starting off, there are some massive changes coming into the Deep Desert. Inside of the post where they broke down their future plans for the Deep Desert, they went into detail on how there are many changes coming for the PvE players when it comes to venturing out into the Deep Desert. I wasn't expecting these changes to make it into the game so quickly, but let's go ahead and start off here. They say that the PvE area has been adjusted to encompass the entire southern half of the Deep Desert map. This means that players who have no interest in PvP should be able to find what they want without engaging in PvP. Imperial testing stations, caves, and so forth can be found in this area and are thus now PvE only. Control points and shipwrecks inside of the Deep Desert, however, will continue to be PvP, which means you will find localized pockets of PvP within the PvE section, similar to how the shipwrecks work inside of the Haga Basin. They go on to say to retain the risk versus reward setup for the Deep Desert, the density of resources increases the further north you go. This includes high density clusters of valuable resources. They also say that the largest spice fields will also spawn in the north, and that the majority of control points will exist in the northern part. As a part of these changes, we've made some balancing adjustments in the Deep Desert. The lower half of the Deep Desert now offers PvE loot that is balanced towards shared loot and PvE activities. You may find better loot in the more dangerous PvP area located further north in the map. For example, in the PvE area, each player gets their own loot and can expect to receive one schematic, while in the PvP area, loot is distributed on a first-come, first-served basis with higher quantities of everything. They go on to say that players can expect to find 2 to 6 schematics there, which are among the rarest. Plus, steel plates can only be found inside of the PvP zones, and the amount of active medium spice fields has been reduced from 8 down to 5, and the number of active small spice fields has been increased from 20 up to 22. The spawn rate of titanium and stravidium has been reduced in the PvE areas so that large quantities only spawn far out in the PvP areas. And then the number of nodes in the resource hotspots in the PvE part of the map has been reduced. And then finally, the respawn timer of titanium and stravidium has been increased from 30 minutes all the way up to 45 minutes. This is a bit heavy-handed here, I believe, when it comes to trying to push PvE into the Deep Desert. They are very much so abandoning PvP almost as quickly as they could here. Personally, though, I think the state of PvP in this game is terrible. It's not fun to partake in. There is actually no reward. There's no real reward for partaking in PvP. And on top of that, it's just completely unbalanced. You have nothing but the Scout Ornithopter rocket meta. So PvP in the current state of the game is already in a frustrating spot, and now they're going to just basically be abandoning it. A little bit frustrating. I would have liked to see them try 2 or 3 different iterations of this to maybe see if they can get it to land. For example, I kept talking about increasing the amount of land inside of the Deep Desert and implementing a Skuld system or a flagged system. The Skuld system will make more sense if you're a RuneScape player, but let's call it a flagged system so that it's a bit more universal of a term. And should you go out into the Deep Desert, you're automatically unflagged. However, if you attack another player, if you initiate combat with another player, you are then flagged, at which point you could lose all of the items, all of the equipment that you have on you, except for, say, 3 items that you decided that you wanted to pick. This would make it to where if you're a PvE player and you get engaged with PvP, you're at risk of losing nothing, while if you manage to flip the tables on the PvPer, you're going to walk away with their gear, which could be a massive upgrade. I think something like that would incentivize PvE players to go out into the deep desert because they're not at risk of losing all of their stuff, just like they're currently not at risk of losing all of their stuff. But it would also give them that opportunity of having a comeback, because there's nothing more exciting in a PvP game than being the underdog and making a massive comeback. But when you do that, and then you get no reward for it, it's lame. It's not fun. However, if we were to, make that comeback and then rock out of there with all of that gear, it would be a completely different story. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I know there's always going to be a majority PvE player base. However, I think that PvP does get neglected, and it's to the game's detriment. Surely there was several ways that they could have gone reworking this system here to make both player bases happy. However, it does look like they are just getting ready to full stop abandon PvP. A lot of people are comparing it to Conan Exiles, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if all of the DLCs that we see in the future are strictly PvE, just to keep the PvE players happy. But let's go ahead and move on in these patch notes here to see what else they've got going on. For example, they have begun some work on the outlined changes that they've made to the Scout Ornithopter, whereas in now equipping a rocket launcher module is now going to decrease the top speed of your Ornithopter, whereas in for the Scout Ornithopters, it's going to be a reduction of 20%. And then surprisingly for the Assault Ornithopters, which are already slow to begin with, the reduction is going to be 10%. This is why I'm saying go ahead with your PvE changes, because you guys have no idea what you're doing to balance PvP, right? If you wanted to balance PvP, you'd be taking the rockets off of the Scout Ornithopter and making the Assault Ornithopter the type of Ornithopter that you want to go out there and attack players with, right? It only makes sense in the name. However, I have no faith that they're going to be able to balance for PvP. So at this point in time, I'm just along for the ride to see what they end up doing with the PvE side of the game, which unfortunately is very redundant as it stands. So honestly, kind of feels like they're burning both bridges here. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, but let's go ahead and move on, because they actually now have a good change coming in where they say exiting your Ornithopter midair will cause them to drop straight down instead of gliding away. We died to the deep desert because of a disconnect due to this fact here, and we also jumped out by accident one time, got eaten by the sandworm. It was ridiculous. This Ornithopter glid like a tile and a half away from me, dropped me in the middle of the sand, just waiting for me to get eaten by this worm. And like I said, the Ornithopter just kept gliding for a tile and a half of the deep desert. Lost my mind on that one. This is a really good fix here. They do say it has a bit of a weird interaction with quicksand, and you might not be able to interact with it if you're in the quicksand. If this happens to you, the workaround is to try to get on top of your vehicle so you can then interact with it. They're working on this. It is a bit of a weird interaction, not working as intended. Let's go ahead and move on into some visiting changes that they've made. They say they've removed the restrictions when visiting other sieges. Before this change, players had their home siege and could visit other sieges in the world, but they couldn't claim land. Now, any player can go to any siege in their world and claim land wherever they want. Ooh, this kind of seems like there's some sieges that might have a lower player base than anticipated, and they're trying to merge the people into one siege, and or there's a lot of people with friends on specific sieges they're trying to hop around. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. That might be a bit of a player base problem right there. There's some technical and stability changes when it comes to the NVIDIA drivers and the NVIDIA GPUs. They've added a player reporting button, and then they go over a bunch of minor fixes, which I'm going to breeze through as quickly as possible. Starting off, they have closed several exploit vulnerabilities. We'll never know what those are, but they've been closed. They've also fixed an issue where a specific type of network issue would cause players to be stuck in an infinite loading screen. On top of that, they fixed an issue where some players could experience a client freeze when traveling between the deep desert servers. When it comes to combat, they fixed an issue where players performing a melee attack could get obstructed by corpses lying on the ground. When it comes to the user interface, they fixed the issue where the guild faction alignment was not localized. They fixed an issue where players could encounter another black screen if they skipped the cinematic at the wreck of the whatever. And they've also fixed an issue where several Sandbike research schematics failed to mention the Imperial testing stations as the primary source. When it comes to travel, they've fixed an issue where players could use an Ornithopter pilot service to fly from cities to the Haga Basin if they had arrived at the city with their ornithopter, essentially leaving their ornithopter in the city and probably deleting the thing because of how the checks work. That would suck. But then, especially if you had like a full inventory or something, hopefully it doesn't delete it. Let me know if that happened to you down in the comments. But finally, they say that you will no longer lose learned emotes when you are respecking your skill tree. This is by far the biggest patch that's come out for Dune Awakening yet. They're making some big changes to the Deep Desert. And like I said in the intro here, they've even got the whole public test servers out now where they're making even more changes to the Deep Desert. This will be an interesting ride. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. We are back in town and the live streams are going to be kicking back up into gear right here on YouTube as well as on Twitch. I'll have a link to the Twitch down in the description in case you're interested. If you made it this far in the video, comment made it down below so I can give you an extra shout out. But other than that, I hope you guys all have an amazing day. I'm out.